At 8:47 that rainy Tuesday night, my phone lit up with a single word from my daughter, run. 10 minutes later, my son-in-law realized he'd spent years mocking the wrong old man. I wish I could tell you I stayed calm. I didn't. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered across the concrete floor of my garage. For a second, I just stared at my phone. Run. Nothing else. No punctuation. No explanation. Just one word from Emily. Most fathers would have called immediately. I didn't. Because 20 years earlier, when Emily was still in high school, I taught her something I'd learned during my 24 years serving alongside Navy SEAL teams. Sometimes one word says more than 100. If she ever sent me a single word instead of a sentence, it meant one thing. She couldn't talk. Someone was with her. And every second mattered. I grabbed the keys to my old silver Ford F-150, the same truck I'd driven for nearly 12 years, and reached for the small canvas bag hanging beside the garage door. Most people would have thought it was just an old tool bag. It wasn't. I kept a flashlight, a first aid kit, bottled water, a phone charger, work gloves, and a few other things inside. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just the habits of a man who'd spent most of his adult life preparing for bad days. Before climbing into the truck, I made one phone call. Mike Donovan answered on the second ring. You awake? I am now. It's Emily. There was a pause. What happened? One-word text. Another pause. Then Mike quietly said, I'm on my way. That was enough. Mike and I had served together for nearly 15 years. We didn't waste words. My name is James Brooks. I'm 67 years old. I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, in the same little ranch house my late wife Susan and I bought back in 1989. These days, my life is simple. On Mondays and Thursdays, I volunteer at the Hampton Roads Veterans Resource Center. Most mornings, I stop by a little diner on Shore Drive where Doris knows I drink black coffee and never say no to bacon. When the weather's nice, I spend afternoons restoring old fishing boats in my garage. It's a peaceful life, exactly the kind Susan always hoped we'd have after I retired. My son-in-law, Ethan Parker, never understood that kind of life. He was 38. Sharp suits, luxury SUV, expensive watch, always talking about investments, clients, and people who thought too small. The first time he saw my truck, he laughed. You know, he said, they make vehicles with Bluetooth now. Emily rolled her eyes. Dad likes his truck. Ethan grinned. I guess once you're an old man, change gets scary. I smiled and kept eating my mashed potatoes. Arguing would have accomplished nothing. Over the years, the jokes became more frequent. He'd pat me on the shoulder. Easy there, old man. Or, don't hurt yourself. Sometimes he'd say it in front of friends. Everybody would laugh. Even Emily sometimes forced a smile, though I could always tell it bothered her. The funny thing was, Ethan assumed my quietness meant weakness. He knew I'd been in the Navy. He knew I'd retired after 24 years. But I'd never talked about what I'd actually did. That wasn't because it was some grand secret. It was because the people I respected most never needed to introduce themselves by telling old war stories. Rain hammered against my windshield as I drove toward Norfolk. Emily lived just 18 minutes away on a quiet street called Willow Creek Lane. I made it in 11. Too fast. Faster than I should have. As I turned the final corner, flashing blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. 2 police cruisers. An ambulance. Neighbors standing under umbrellas. My stomach dropped. I parked before the truck had fully stopped rolling. A young patrol officer stepped toward me. Sir, you can't. I live here. It wasn't true, but it got me past him. The front door stood wide open. The porch light flickered in the rain. Broken glass covered the entryway. Inside, I heard Ethan's voice. Calm, steady, almost annoyed. I'm telling you, he said to one of the officers, she just overreacted and ran off. I stepped into the doorway. Ethan turned toward me. For the first time all evening, his smile disappeared. Ethan recovered quickly. He always did. One second, he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The next, his face settled into that smooth, reasonable expression he used with bank managers and restaurant hosts. James, he said, like I had arrived early for Sunday dinner. Emily's upset. I looked past him. The living room lamp was knocked sideways. A picture frame lay face down near the couch. One dining chair had been pushed into the wall hard enough to leave a dent in the drywall. A paramedic stood near the kitchen, speaking quietly with one of the officers. Where is she? I asked. Ethan spread his hands. She left. Without her car. His eyes shifted toward the driveway. Emily's blue Honda Accord was parked beside his black Range Rover. She called a friend, maybe. Which friend? I don't know, James. She was emotional. That word bothered me. Not because Emily never became emotional. She did. Everybody does. But Ethan said it the way a person labels a box before putting it on a shelf. Once he called her emotional, nothing she said afterward had to be taken seriously. The younger officer stepped between us. "Sir, I need you to remain calm." "I am calm." He studied me for a moment, probably deciding whether I was telling the truth. I was. My pulse was high, but anger and panic are luxuries when someone you love may be in danger. I walked toward the kitchen. Ethan moved to block me. "This is my home, and she's my daughter." The older officer touched Ethan's arm. "Let him look around." Ethan stepped aside, but not before giving me a warning glance. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the broken ceramic bowl in the trash can, white pieces with blue flowers. I had bought Emily that bowl at a craft fair in Williamsburg. Someone had swept most of it up. Most. A small shard remained under the edge of the rug. There was a dark red smear beside it. I crouched. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. I lifted the corner of the rug. 3 drops of blood marked the hardwood underneath. The officer came closer. "Mr. Parker, you said nobody was injured." "Nobody was?" I looked toward the counter. Emily's purse hung from the back of a chair. Her wallet was visible inside. Her inhaler sat beside the toaster. She had carried that inhaler everywhere since she was 12. "She didn't leave voluntarily," I said. Ethan gave a short laugh. "You don't know that. She left her purse, her wallet, her car, and the medication she needs to breathe. She was upset." There's that word again. The older officer photographed the blood, then asked Ethan to repeat his story. This time Ethan added details. Emily had thrown the bowl. Emily had cut her hand. Emily had walked out before he could stop her. Each new detail arrived only after we found evidence that required one. I asked about the security cameras mounted above the front door and garage. "They're offline," Ethan said. "Since when?" "Internet trouble." I glanced at the router. Every light was green. The officers searched the backyard and spoke to 2 neighbors. One woman reported hearing shouting. Another had seen a white SUV near the house around 8:40. Nobody had seen Emily walk away. Still, there wasn't enough for an arrest. No body, no witness to an assault, no clear crime scene. After nearly 40 minutes, the ambulance left empty. Ethan stood on the porch with his arms folded. "Are you finished?" I stepped close enough that only he could hear me. "No," he smirked. "What are you going to do, old man?" I looked at him then, at the unplugged camera cable hanging beside the garage. "I'm going to find my daughter." His smirk faded when I added, "And while I'm doing that, you'd better decide which version of your story you plan to keep." The police finally pulled away a little after 10. Their taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving Willow Creek Lane quiet again. Too quiet. Ethan stood on the front porch with his hands in his pockets. "You satisfied?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "No." He shrugged. "I've told everybody the truth." I nodded slowly. "That's funny. What is—" "You've told 3 different versions of it in less than an hour." His smile stiffened. I turned and walked back toward my truck. There was nothing else to accomplish there tonight. Not by arguing. Mike Donovan was already waiting outside my house when I pulled into the driveway. His old Chevrolet Tahoe looked exactly like it had 5 years ago, washed dented on the rear bumper, and somehow always smelling faintly of black coffee. He climbed out before I shut off the engine. "How bad?" I leaned against the truck. "Worse than I expected." "Emily." I shook my head. "No sign of her." Mike didn't ask another question. Instead, he handed me a paper cup. "Coffee. Still hot. Figured you'd need this." I smiled for the first time all night. You always did think ahead. Occupational habit. We stood in silence for nearly a minute. Some friendships don't need constant conversation. I spread a neighborhood map across my kitchen table. Emily's routine hadn't changed much over the past few years. If she'd managed to leave on her own, she would have gone somewhere familiar. Mike pointed with his finger. "Where first? The coffee shop." By 7 the next morning, we were sitting inside Bay Breeze Cafe on Shore Drive. The waitress recognized me immediately. "Morning, James." "Morning, Linda." The usual, "Please." She poured my coffee before I even answered. Small towns have a comforting rhythm. People notice when something feels wrong. Linda looked toward the empty chair across from mine. "Emily coming today?" My stomach tightened. "No." "Haven't seen her in almost a week." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "She usually stops by Thursday mornings before work." Mike and I exchanged a quick glance. Emily never missed Thursday breakfast. Never. Our next stop was the animal shelter where Emily volunteered every Saturday. The manager recognized her picture immediately. "Sweet girl. When did you see her last?" I asked. "Last weekend." "Anything unusual?" The woman hesitated. "Actually," she walked into her office and returned carrying a small canvas tote bag. Emily forgot this. Inside were dog treats, a paperback novel, and a folded receipt from a Cracker Barrel in Chesapeake. The date was 3 days earlier. Written on the back in Emily's handwriting were 4 words. Ask Sarah, don't call. Mike quietly whistled. Looks like she wanted you to find this. Sarah Jensen agreed to meet us that afternoon. Not at her house, not at work. At the Cracker Barrel where Emily had apparently left the clue. Sarah looked exhausted before she even sat down. She wrapped both hands around a glass of sweet tea. I've been scared to call you. Why, Ethan. What about him? He came to my office Monday. Mike leaned forward. He threatened you. Sarah nodded. He smiled the whole time. What did he say? She swallowed. He told me Emily was going through emotional problems. The same word again. Emotional. He said if anyone asked questions, she looked down at the table. I should encourage them not to interfere. I felt anger building inside me. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. Sarah reached into her purse. Emily gave me this last month. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. If anything happened, her voice broke. She said only you should have it. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just a plain black USB drive. Mike looked at me. Let's get home. An hour later, I plugged the drive into my desktop computer. One folder opened automatically. Backup. Inside were dozens of scanned documents. Mortgage records, bank statements, insurance forms. Most looked ordinary, until I noticed something. Emily's signature appeared on nearly every page. But it wasn't the signature I'd watched my daughter write her entire adult life. Someone had copied it, poorly. The more files I opened, the worse it became. Then I found a spreadsheet. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been transferred through accounts connected to Ethan's financial firm. My hands tightened around the mouse. This isn't just abuse, Mike said quietly. I nodded. No, this is fraud. Just then, a loud crash echoed from outside. We rushed into the garage. The side window had been smashed. Glass covered my workbench. Nothing valuable was gone. Not the tools, not the fishing equipment, not even the cash hidden inside an old tackle box. Only one thing had disappeared. The weathered green notebook I'd carried through nearly every deployment of my military career. Mike stared at the broken window. They know exactly who you are now. I looked into the darkness beyond the garage. For the first time, I realized someone had started hunting me too. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the broken garage window. Not because someone had stolen my old deployment journal. It was the flash drive. I kept replaying the documents in my head. Mortgage papers. Wire transfers. Signatures that looked enough like Emily's to fool someone who didn't know her. But I knew every curve of my daughter's handwriting. When she signed her name, she always looped the Y a little farther than most people. It was something she'd done since high school. Every signature on those documents stopped short. Someone had practiced her name, but they had never become her. At 6 the next morning, Mike was already frying bacon in my kitchen. I figured you weren't going back to bed. I wasn't. He slid a plate across the table. Eat first. I don't have much appetite. Neither did I after Fallujah. I looked up. He smiled. But starving yourself never solved anything. I laughed quietly. Somehow, after all these years, Mike still knew exactly when to lighten the mood. By 8:30, we were sitting inside the Norfolk Circuit Court building. Government buildings all smell the same. Coffee, old paper, floor wax. The clerk helping us couldn't have been older than 30. Her name tag read, Karen Holloway. I'd like certified copies of every property filing involving Ethan and Emily Parker. She typed for several minutes, then frowned. That's strange. What is... There are 3 home equity loans. I blinked. 3? Yes, sir. Emily had once told me they refinanced the house after interest rates dropped. 1 loan, not 3. Karen printed the records. Mike and I read them together. The first looked legitimate. The second, questionable. The third nearly made me stand up. The collateral wasn't just the house. It included several investment accounts belonging to Emily. Accounts she'd inherited after Susan passed away. I stared at the numbers. Almost $640,000. Mike looked over at me. Did Emily ever mention this? Never. Karen quietly leaned closer. I probably shouldn't say this. Neither of us interrupted. But these filings were all prepared by the same law office. She pointed to the bottom of the page. Parker & Parker Legal Group. Richard Parker. Ethan's father. The drive back to Virginia Beach felt longer than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Mike finally broke the silence. This just became bigger. I know. It isn't just Ethan. No. I looked out the passenger window. It's the whole family. That afternoon, I drove to Richard Parker's law office. Not because I expected answers, because I wanted to look him in the eye. His receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm sorry, Mr. Parker is with clients. Tell him James Brooks is here. Her smile disappeared for just a moment. She picked up the phone. Less than a minute later, Richard stepped into the lobby. Perfect gray suit. Perfect smile. Perfect politician's handshake. James. Richard. I'm terribly sorry about Emily. I imagine you are. He tilted his head. Families go through difficult seasons. I looked directly at him. My daughter disappeared, and I'm sure the police are handling it. They're trying. He folded his hands. I hope you aren't suggesting Ethan had anything to do with it. I haven't suggested anything. Good. He smiled again. Because accusations can become very expensive. There it was. Not concern. A warning. I smiled back. You know. He raised an eyebrow. My wife used to tell me something. Oh, when honest people start talking about lawsuits before they start talking about family? I paused. They're usually hiding something. For the first time since we'd met, Richard stopped smiling. That evening, Mike called. I've got something. What? I tracked the company listed on those mortgage filings. Henri, it doesn't own the warehouse. So, it owns the private security company. I sat upright. The same one that was parked outside, the same one. And guess who owns the holding company? I already knew before he answered. Richard Parker. Not Ethan. Richard. The respected attorney. The generous church donor. The man who shook veterans' hands every Memorial Day. The man everyone in Norfolk trusted. I stared at the rain falling outside my living room window. Finding Emily had just become much harder. Because now I wasn't fighting one arrogant son-in-law. I was fighting an entire family that had spent years building a spotless public reputation. And people like that never go down quietly. By Friday morning, I had stopped asking myself one question. Where is Emily? Instead, I started asking a different one. What was she trying so hard to protect? People don't disappear over a simple argument. Not grown women with steady jobs, close friends, and fathers they trust. Emily hadn't vanished because of one bad night. She'd been preparing for something. I just hadn't seen it. Mike pulled into my driveway a little after 7. He climbed out carrying a white bakery box from Sugar Plum Bakery. Cinnamon rolls. I raised an eyebrow. We're chasing criminals. He shrugged. Nobody thinks clearly on an empty stomach. I laughed. I've missed working with you. You miss telling me I'm wrong. That's true. For 5 minutes, we sat on my back porch eating cinnamon rolls while the neighborhood slowly woke up. Kids waited for school buses. A man walked his golden retriever. Someone across the street waved while loading fishing poles into a pickup. It struck me how ordinary life keeps moving even when your own world feels like it's falling apart. Around 9, Mike's phone rang. He listened for less than a minute before hanging up. I found the warehouse. The one tied to Richard. He nodded. My friend at the county assessor's office confirmed the ownership trail. Occupied. Officially, he smiled. No. Unofficially, lots of nighttime activity. The warehouse sat near an old marina along the Elizabeth River. Years ago, commercial fishing boats used the docks every morning. Now most of the buildings stood empty. Broken windows, rusted loading doors. We parked nearly half a mile away behind an abandoned bait shop. I'm getting too old for long walks, Mike muttered. That's what you said 15 years ago. And I was right then too. Even under pressure, Mike could still make me laugh. We reached the warehouse just after sunset. No dramatic break-in. The side service door had been left slightly open. Someone inside clearly believed nobody would ever come looking. The smell hit me first. Salt water, diesel fuel, old wood. Flashlights stayed off until we were inside. Moonlight slipped through broken skylights, giving us just enough to see. Rows of metal shelving lined the building. Most were empty. Near the back sat 3 gray filing cabinets, unlocked. Mike quietly opened the first drawer. Tax documents. Corporate records. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held property deeds. Still nothing. Then I opened the third. Mortgage files. Dozens of them. Every borrower was over 65. Retired teachers. Veterans. Widows. Many of the signatures looked strangely familiar. Not because I knew the people, because they all shared the same awkward handwriting pattern I'd seen on Emily's paperwork. Someone had been forging signatures for years. Mike looked at another folder. This isn't just fraud. No, it's systematic. Then I noticed something taped beneath the bottom drawer. A small digital voice recorder. Dust covered everything around it. Not the recorder. Someone had hidden it recently. I pressed play. Static. Then Emily's voice. If Dad ever hears this, my chest tightened. It means I ran out of time. I closed my eyes. She sounded tired, scared. I copied everything. Paper shuffled somewhere in the background. Ethan doesn't know. Another voice entered the recording. Ethan, if your father gets involved, he laughed quietly. He won't be around long enough to regret it. The recording ended. Neither Mike nor I spoke for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, "We've got him." I shook my head. "Not yet. We've got his voice." That proves a threat. It proves motive. But it doesn't tell us where Emily is. We copied every document we could find onto a portable scanner Mike had brought. It took almost 40 minutes. Just as I zipped the last file into my backpack, headlights swept across the warehouse wall. Mike froze. So much for an easy night. 2 black SUVs rolled through the loading gate. 4 men climbed out. Not police. Private security. Matching jackets. Earpieces. Disciplined. One of them pointed toward the side entrance. "They're inside." Mike looked at me. "Back exit." I nodded. We slipped through the rear loading dock just as flashlights began sweeping the warehouse. A guard spotted movement. Their footsteps thundered behind us. We sprinted across the old marina. The wooden docks groaned beneath our boots. One guard was gaining fast. I reached the final pier, looked once over my shoulder, and jumped. The cold water hit like concrete. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then instinct took over. I swam beneath the dock until the shouting faded. When I finally climbed onto the opposite shoreline, 20 minutes later, soaked and exhausted, my left shoulder screamed with the same old pain I'd carried since my last deployment. I looked back across the dark river. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about whether I could still outrun younger men. I was worried that this fight might demand more from me than I still had left to give. The first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was my shoulder. By the time Mike helped me into his Tahoe, the cold from the Elizabeth River had settled deep into the old injury I'd carried for nearly 20 years. I tried pretending it was nothing. Mike wasn't buying it. "You can't even lift your left arm." "I'll be fine." He started the engine. That's not what I asked. I leaned my head against the window as we drove towards Centara, Virginia Beach General Hospital. "I don't have time for this." "You don't have a choice." The emergency room looked exactly like every emergency room I'd ever seen. Bright lights, plastic chairs, a television playing the morning news while nobody watched it, a little boy with a bandaged knee coloring dinosaurs, an elderly couple quietly holding hands. Life doesn't stop because yours has fallen apart. The physician's assistant ordered x-rays. Good news, nothing broken. Bad news, my old rotator cuff injury had flared up badly. "You've strained it again," she said. "I've had worse," she smiled. "I believe you." Then she became serious. "If you keep pushing it, you may lose full range of motion permanently." Permanent. That's a word older people hear more often than they like. I thanked her, accepted the sling she handed me, and walked out into the parking lot. Mike was waiting beside the Tahoe. "What did they say?" "I need to slow down." He laughed. "So, exactly what I told you yesterday." Back at my house, I stood in the garage, staring at the half-finished Boston whaler I'd been restoring. Normally, working with my hands settled my mind. Not today. Every time I picked up a wrench, my shoulder reminded me I wasn't 40 anymore. I slammed the tool onto the workbench harder than I meant to. Mike looked up from the paperwork spread across my kitchen table. "You okay?" "No." "You want to talk about it?" "I want to find my daughter." "You will." "I keep getting there one step too late." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked into the garage and picked up the wrench I'd thrown. "You remember Afghanistan?" I smiled faintly. "Which time?" "The canyon." I knew exactly what he meant. Our team's youngest operator had wanted to charge straight into an ambush. Our commander stopped him with 4 words. "Slow is smooth." Mike rested the wrench on the bench. "And smooth is fast." I nodded. We'd repeated that saying hundreds of times over the years. Not because it sounded clever. Because rushing usually got people hurt. I looked down at the sling around my arm. Maybe I was trying to solve this the way a younger man would. Maybe age wasn't my weakness. Maybe refusing to act my age was... That afternoon, my phone rang. "Unknown number." I answered. Silence. Then Ethan's voice. "How's the shoulder?" My grip tightened. "So you're watching me?" A soft chuckle. "I've always underestimated old people." "You still are." "I heard you took a swim." "I've had better evenings." He laughed. "You know, James, maybe it's time you accepted something." "And what's that?" "Emily doesn't want to be found." I closed my eyes. He wanted anger. He wanted me to lose control. Instead, I asked quietly, "Are you finished?" There was a pause. Then he hung up. Mike looked at me. "Him?" I nodded. "What did he want?" "To make me chase him." "And so I'm done chasing." That evening, I spread every document across my dining room table. Mortgage records, bank transfers, Property deeds. Emily's recording. Something felt incomplete. Then I noticed it. Every fraudulent transfer had been approved on either a Tuesday or a Friday. Never Monday. Never Wednesday. Never Thursday. Mike leaned over. Coincidence. I don't believe in that. I opened another folder. The transfers always happened after one particular event. Richard Parker hosted a private investor luncheon twice every month at the Norfolk Yacht Club. High net worth retirees, veterans, widows, people who trusted him. The money moved within 24 hours of every luncheon. Mike looked at me. So that's how they picked their victims. I nodded slowly. They weren't just stealing from random people. They were grooming them. For the first time since Emily disappeared, I stopped thinking like a father desperate to rescue his daughter. I started thinking like an investigator building a case. That changed everything. Because if Ethan believed I was still looking for Emily, he'd never notice I was quietly learning how his entire operation worked. And sometimes, the smartest move an old man can make is letting everyone believe he's fallen behind. The following Tuesday, I shaved, put on a clean flannel shirt, and drove to the Norfolk Yacht Club. Not because I had an invitation, because I wanted someone to notice me. Sometimes the easiest way to stay invisible is to let people think they've already figured you out. I parked my old Ford F-150 between a new Cadillac Escalade and a black Mercedes sedan. My truck looked like it belonged to another decade. That was fine with me. I walked through the lobby carrying a folder under my arm and wearing the sling the doctor had insisted I keep on. An older hostess smiled. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you here for the Parker Investment Luncheon?" "I believe so." "Wonderful. Mr. Parker always welcomes new guests." Exactly what I'd hoped to hear. The ballroom overlooked the Elizabeth River. About 40 people sat around neatly arranged tables. Most were retired. Some wore Vietnam veteran caps. Others looked like school teachers or small business owners enjoying retirement. Coffee was being poured. Cheesecake sat on dessert plates, even though lunch hadn't started yet. Richard Parker moved from table to table, shaking hands like a politician during election season. He finally spotted me. For half a second, his smile disappeared. Then it returned. "James, Richard, I didn't expect to see you. I've been thinking about investing." He laughed politely. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place." I smiled. "I've heard that before." The presentation lasted nearly 45 minutes. Richard talked about secure retirement strategies, guaranteed growth, protecting family wealth. Every sentence sounded practiced, confident, comforting. The audience nodded along. I watched something else. The assistants. Every time Richard mentioned paperwork, one young employee quietly made notes beside certain names. Not everyone's, only a few. Mostly widows, older couples, people sitting alone. Mike had been right. This wasn't random. They knew exactly who they wanted. After lunch ended, I lingered near the coffee station. One elderly Marine struck up a conversation. "You served?" "I did." "Navy?" "Yes, sir." He smiled. "Semper Fi, anyway." I laughed. My brother would have appreciated that. We talked for nearly 10 minutes. His name was Frank Dawson, retired firefighter, 74 years old. When Richard walked past us, Frank called him over. "Richard, this gentleman served too." Richard forced another smile. "We're always honored to support our veterans." I looked directly at him. "I'm sure you are." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As people began leaving, I walked toward the parking lot. Halfway there, my phone vibrated. "Unknown number," I answered. A whisper. "Dad?" Every muscle in my body froze. "Emily." "I can't talk." Her voice sounded weak. "Tired." "I'm okay." "Where are you?" "I only have a minute." Cars passed somewhere near her. A dog barked in the distance. Then I heard something else. A train horn. Long, low, immediately followed by church bells. Emily spoke quickly. "Remember where Mom used to take us for 4th of July fireworks?" I closed my eyes. She wasn't making conversation. She was giving me directions. The old lakeside neighborhood near Colonial Place. There was a railroad crossing less than a block from St. Mark's Church. I remember. "I'm there." Before I could ask another question, she whispered, "He doesn't know I kept the second phone." Then the line went dead. I called Mike before I even reached my truck. "I've got her location." "You sure?" 90%. "That's not enough to charge in." "I know. We do this right." "I know." 10 years ago, I might have ignored him. Driven straight there. Kicked indoors until I found my daughter. At 67, I'd learned that courage and impatience aren't the same thing. By late afternoon, 2 detectives from Norfolk Police joined us at a vacant parking lot overlooking Colonial Place. Detective Laura Mitchell spread a neighborhood map across the hood of her unmarked SUV. We've been watching Richard Parker for weeks, she admitted. I looked at her. You have? She nodded. We just didn't have enough. Mike quietly placed Emily's flash drive on the hood. You might now. Laura spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing the files on her laptop. She finally looked up. This changes everything. What do you mean? She turned the screen toward us. One spreadsheet listed dozens of investor accounts. Most of the account holders were over 65. Several had military pension deposits. Another column caught my attention. Status. Some names had a green check mark. Others had a yellow circle. 3 names were highlighted in red. Emily's name was one of them. Laura exhaled slowly. They weren't just targeting wealthy retirees. She looked at me. They were targeting veterans. Mike's face hardened. White. Laura clicked another file. A handwritten note appeared. Military families trust recommendations faster. Lower risk of reporting fraud. Silence settled over the parking lot. Emily hadn't risked her life to expose one abusive husband. She'd uncovered a scheme that had stolen from the very people I'd spent my career serving beside. I looked toward the river in the distance. This ends now. Laura nodded. It does, but not quietly. The call came at 9:12 the next morning. Detective Laura Mitchell didn't waste time with small talk. James, I'm here. We found Emily. For just a second, I couldn't speak. My hand tightened around the coffee mug sitting on my kitchen counter. Is she? She's alive. I closed my eyes. The breath I'd been holding for nearly a week finally escaped. Where is she? A lake house in Colonial Place. My God, we're bringing her in now. I reached for my truck keys. Laura stopped me. Not yet. Why? Because she doesn't want the arrest to happen today. I frowned. What do you mean? She wants everyone to see who they really are. An hour later, Mike and I met Emily at the Norfolk Police Headquarters. The moment she walked through the interview room door, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. A fading bruise colored the side of her neck. But she was standing. The second she saw me, she burst into tears. Dad. I crossed the room before she finished the word. She wrapped both arms around me and cried into my shoulder like she hadn't since she was a little girl. I'm sorry, she whispered. You've got nothing to be sorry for. I should have told you sooner. I gently pulled back. You told me when you could. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I thought I could fix it myself. I know. I was wrong. No. I smiled softly. You were brave. Laura laid several photographs across the conference table. Emily filled in the missing pieces. There were copies of wire transfers, email chains, shell company registrations, and finally, one invitation. The Parker Foundation Annual Community Leadership Gala, Friday evening. The Waterside Marriott, downtown Norfolk. Richard Parker would receive the Hampton Roads Community Leadership Award. Television cameras, business leaders, judges, military officers, nearly 400 guests. Laura looked at all 3 of us. If we arrest them today, she tapped the invitation. They become victims. Emily nodded. They'll say it's a misunderstanding. Mike folded his arms. So what's the plan? Laura smiled. We let Richard give his speech. Friday evening arrived. I hadn't worn a suit in nearly 3 years. The dark navy jacket still fit. Mostly, Mike adjusted his tie while looking into the hotel lobby mirror. You clean up pretty well. So do you. I hate ties. I know. They're tiny nooses. I laughed. Some things never change. The ballroom looked exactly like every charity fundraiser I'd ever attended. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters carrying silver trays. Large American flags stood beside the stage. On giant screens rotated photographs of Richard Parker shaking hands with veterans, presenting scholarships, donating checks, smiling, always smiling. Emily sat beside me wearing a simple blue dress. She looked nervous. You don't have to go on stage. I know. You've already done enough. She looked toward Richard. No. She quietly shook her head. I'm done hiding. At precisely 7:30 p.m., the MC stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, applause filled the ballroom. It is my honor to introduce a man whose generosity has touched thousands of lives. Richard stood. The audience rose with him. Standing ovation. He smiled modestly, placed one hand over his heart, then walked toward the podium. My friends, he paused for applause. True success isn't measured by wealth. Mike leaned toward me. Here it comes. It's measured by integrity. The room applauded again. Richard continued speaking. About family, service, faith, helping others. Then the ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. Richard stopped talking. He looked toward the sound booth. What seems to be the problem One of the giant screens flickered. His smiling charity photographs disappeared. In their place, a mortgage document, Emily's forged signature. The room went silent. Another document appeared. Wire transfers. Another. A spreadsheet listing elderly military retirees. Another. A voice recording began playing through every speaker. Ethan's voice echoed across the ballroom. If your father gets involved, he won't be around long enough to regret it. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Richard slowly turned toward the audience. His confident smile had vanished. Then another voice came over the speakers. Emily's. I copied everything. Gas spread across the ballroom. Television cameras swung away from the stage and pointed directly at Richard Parker. For the first time in his carefully constructed public life, there was nowhere left for him to hide. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not Richard. Not Ethan. Not the guests. It was the kind of silence that only comes after people realize they've been watching the wrong story. Richard looked toward the audiovisual booth. There must be some mistake. His voice was steady. But I'd spent enough years reading people under pressure to notice the tiny things. The twitch in his jaw. The way his right hand tightened around the podium. The sweat beginning to form along his hairline. Those weren't the signs of an innocent man. Those were the signs of someone running out of places to hide. The ballroom doors opened. Detective Laura Mitchell walked in first. 2 FBI agents followed behind her. Not with weapons drawn. Not shouting. Just carrying folders. The room parted without anyone being asked. Laura stepped onto the stage. Richard Parker. He forced another smile. I believe this is a misunderstanding. Laura handed him a document. No, sir, it isn't. He glanced down at the first page. A federal search warrant. The color drained from his face. Ethan stood so quickly his chair crashed onto the floor. This is ridiculous. His voice echoed across the ballroom. She's lying. He pointed directly at Emily. She's mentally unstable. I watched the audience. A week earlier, several people might have believed him. Not now. Not after hearing his own voice over the speakers. Emily slowly stood. She wasn't shaking anymore. She walked toward the stage carrying nothing except a thin blue folder. The entire ballroom watched her. She stopped a few feet from Ethan. You told everyone I was emotional. Ethan laughed nervously. You are. She opened the folder. Inside were photographs, bank records, emails. My name appears on more than 30 loan documents. She looked directly at him. I signed exactly one. The room remained completely silent. Then she held up another page. This is my real signature. She placed it beside one of the forged documents displayed on the giant screen. Even from the back of the ballroom, the difference was obvious. A woman near the front whispered, "Oh my goodness." Richard tried one last time. "This is a private family matter." Laura shook her head. "No." She turned toward the audience. "Our investigation has identified more than 100 victims." Murmurs spread across the room. Several elderly couples looked at each other. One retired Army colonel slowly stood. "My wife invested with your company." Another man spoke from across the ballroom. "So did my sister." Then another voice. "And my mother." Within seconds, people were pulling out phones, searching emails, checking account statements. The room had transformed. An hour earlier, these people had come to celebrate Richard Parker. Now they were asking each other the same frightening question. Did he steal from us too? Ethan looked around desperately. He no longer had control of the room. He took one step toward Emily. "You did this." She met his eyes. "No. I trusted you. You betrayed me." His breathing became heavier. "You ruined everything." Before Emily could answer, I walked beside her. For years, Ethan had looked down on me, mocked my age, laughed at my old truck, patronized me at every family dinner. Now he looked small, not because he'd been arrested, because the truth had finally caught up with him. He stared at me. "You think you won?" I smiled gently. "No." He frowned. "This was never about winning." I glanced around the ballroom, at the veterans, the retired teachers, the widows, the families. It was about making sure nobody else lost. The FBI agents approached Ethan. "Mr. Parker." One agent nodded toward the exit. "We need you to come with us." This time, he didn't argue. He looked once at Richard. His father avoided his eyes. For the first time in Ethan's life, nobody was coming to rescue him. As he walked past me, he stopped. Quietly, almost in a whisper, he asked, "When did you know?" I thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. "I knew something was wrong the day my daughter stopped laughing." He lowered his head. Without another word, he walked out of the ballroom. 3 months later, the investigation uncovered nearly $18 million in fraudulent investment schemes targeting retirees across southeastern Virginia. More than 100 families recovered at least part of what had been stolen. Richard Parker was disbarred. Ethan pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges rather than face trial. Neither sentence erased the pain they caused, but both men finally faced the consequences of choices they'd spent years hiding behind polished smiles. Emily filed for divorce, not because I told her to, because she had finally remembered what peace felt like. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it begins the moment someone decides they're no longer willing to live in fear. People still ask me if I hate Ethan. It's an honest question. After everything that happened, they expect an honest answer. The truth usually surprises them. I don't hate him. Hate takes too much energy. At 67, I've learned to spend my energy on people who deserve it. Emily deserves it. My granddaughter deserves it. The men I still meet every Thursday morning at the Veterans Center deserve it. The rest, I leave behind. Almost 8 months passed before life began to feel ordinary again. The criminal cases moved through federal court exactly the way most financial crime cases do. Slowly. There were hearings in Norfolk. Forensic accountants spent weeks tracing wire transfers through shell companies. Retired couples gave heartbreaking testimony about losing the savings they'd spent 40 years building. One former Marine and his wife had invested nearly every dollar they had after Richard Parker promised safe retirement income. A retired elementary school teacher admitted she'd skipped medical treatments because she believed the money was gone forever. Listening to them reminded me that Emily had never been the only victim. She'd simply been the first person brave enough to stop pretending everything was fine. When the sentencing finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. Richard Parker received a lengthy federal prison sentence for conspiracy, wire fraud, and financial exploitation. Ethan stood a few feet away when the judge read his sentence. He looked older, not because of prison, because arrogance ages people faster than time ever will. As deputies led him away, he turned toward me one last time. He didn't apologize. He didn't make excuses. He simply lowered his head. For the first time since I'd met him, he understood that actions always outlive pride. Emily finalized her divorce that autumn. The judge awarded her full ownership of what remained of her inheritance and dismissed every fraudulent debt created through the forged documents. It wasn't a perfect ending. Some money was never recovered. Some memories never completely heal. But she had something more valuable: freedom. A few months later, she accepted a position with a nonprofit organization in Chesapeake that helps older Americans recognize financial scams. The first evening she came home from work, she sat across from me on my back porch. "I met a widow today," she said. "How's she doing?" "Better," Emily smiled. "She almost signed away her retirement." But she didn't. No. She looked out toward the trees swaying behind my yard. "We stopped it in time." I nodded quietly. "Your mom would have been proud of you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I hope so. I know so." These days my mornings are simple again. Every Thursday Mike still picks me up at 7:30. He still complains about gas prices. I still complain about his driving. Neither of us means it. After breakfast, we usually stop by the marina. The old Boston whaler I was restoring now sits in the water where it belongs. Sometimes we'll take it out into Chesapeake Bay with a couple of fishing poles and absolutely no intention of catching anything. Mike says fishing gives old men an excuse to stare at the water without anyone asking what they're thinking. He's probably right. Last weekend, Emily brought my 6-year-old granddaughter Lily over for the afternoon. She raced into the garage wearing pink rain boots, even though the sky was perfectly clear. "Grandpa, what happened?" "I found a treasure." She opened her tiny hand. Inside was a rusty bolt she'd picked up near my workbench. I looked at it carefully. "That's a pretty good find." She smiled proudly. "Can we fix another boat?" "We sure can." For the next 2 hours, she handed me screwdrivers that were too big, held the flashlight in exactly the wrong place, and asked at least 50 questions. It was perfect. As the sun began to set, she climbed onto the dock and skipped a small stone across the water. It bounced twice. She threw both arms into the air like she'd just won the lottery. I watched her laugh. Really laugh. And I realized something. The greatest revenge wasn't exposing Ethan in front of hundreds of people. It wasn't the prison sentence. It wasn't watching powerful men lose everything they had stolen. The greatest victory was hearing my daughter laugh again, and knowing my granddaughter would grow up in a home where she never had to be afraid. If this story reminds you of someone who has quietly carried more than they should, I hope it encourages you to reach out to them. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who ask for help the latest. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you'll join me again for another story about family resilience and finding the courage to do the right thing. The end.